Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, my entitled neighbor was jealous of my classic car and demanded that I let her drive it around with her kids. When I refused, she raged and ended up trying to destroy my vehicle with a board of nails. Here is what happened to this awful neighbor. Let's dive right into the story. Ever since I was a kid, I've been in love with Cadillacs. I've always been determined to own one, and when I passed my driving test, it was one of the first cars that I bought. Not the first, because my father was adamant that my first car should be some beat-up piece of scrap. That way, when I inevitably have an accident, it won't be a great loss. I was upset naturally, and not just because my father did not have faith that I could drive, even after getting a pretty high score on my test. And well, he was right. I ended up crashing and totaling my first car before the year was out. As humbled as I was, my father told me that if I wanted to get a decent car, especially a Caddy, I had to earn the money myself. That way I would be more inclined to look after it. In the interim, he was happy to buy me whatever pile of rust he could get for under 50 bucks. Since that time, I've pretty much only owned Cadillacs, but what I really wanted was a 1953 Cadillac Eldorado Special Sport Convertible Coupe. And they were not cheap and only getting more expensive as time went on. I had plenty of opportunities to buy one, but they were so bad, so rusted, and so falling apart, it was not really worth the money. I wanted something that I could work on, but I am no mechanic and so was not looking for a full-on project car. Fast forward about 35 years, retirement is on the horizon, huge amounts of money saved up in a handful of saving accounts and ISAs, and I finally found my dream car. It was not the special sports convertible coupe, but it was a sports convertible and I was over the moon. It was a beast. The sound of the V8 when you first turned the ignition made my whole body tingle, and it had such a beautiful deep and throaty chuck when idle. I loved it so much that I would just sit on my driveway and listen to it grumble like Sam Elliott over a cigar and whiskey. Needless to say, my neighbor quickly noticed and took an interest. I never pegged her for a car enthusiast, but she was certainly coming around and salivating over the car. I showed her around, gave her the in-depth tour, and she seemed to really get into it. I never really spoke to my neighbor much before, our daily lives never really afforded us to cross paths much. The time went by and I think I must have had the car for about 3 or 4 months. I had taken it into the garage a couple of times to get some of the gubbins tweaked, and another time I got the paint restored to its glorious luster. I had the money spare since I could not get the special. Also, it was a beautiful Friday afternoon and I had moved the Caddy onto the front lawn as all my work tools were in the garage. The driveway is not so big that I can park my van and Caddy on the driveway, so normally my van gets parked on the front lawn. Karen, the neighbor, not her real name, comes over. "You working this afternoon?" she asked me. "Yeah, I got some flower beds to tend to," I replied. "Oh, okay, say, I don't suppose you would let me drive your Caddy for a bit. I love it so much and I'm dying to drive it." I could not believe the cheek. I honestly thought she was joking, and as I laughed at her, she just looked at me deadpan. "Definitely not," I said. "Why not?" At this point, Karen got really upset and angry in a heartbeat. I was staggered. I had no idea how to respond other than with telling her that there was no way I would ever let anyone else drive my Caddy. She then stormed off, muttering some crap under her breath, and what could have been a friendship died right there on my driveway. After that, Karen never came around again. She would just stand on her porch whenever I was out tinkering or washing the Caddy and just stare at me, or make excuses to come out into the garden just to stare daggers at me all the while. It became uncomfortable, but I did my best to ignore her and I tried to show that she was not getting to me. The wife even said she was gonna go around there and have a word with her. I advised her not to. I did not want to go and cause any more trouble, and around the time of Thanksgiving, things did get more troublesome. We had the family around and Karen had her family around. The Caddy was out on the driveway as usual for all to see and admire. Karen's family certainly did admire it, so much so that later in the afternoon, once we were all sleepy from eating too much turkey and food, there was a knock on the door. I answered to see Karen looking up at me with puppy eyes and a pleasing smile. Some kids stood in a gaggle behind her. I think she was trying to use them to emotionally blackmail me, and she had the nerve to ask me in front of her grandchildren or something if she could borrow my caddy and drive the kids around. Obviously, I explained to her again that I was not gonna let anyone else drive my caddy, but I was more than happy to give the kids a ride around the block a couple of times. I'm not a monster. But she said, absolutely not. I'm not gonna let a stranger drive my grandchildren around in their car. She practically shouted at me, red-faced and everything. I thought the whole thing was ludicrous, and the kids certainly looked like they were about to cry. Eventually, she buggered off back next door, kids in tow, vowing that she was gonna make me pay for upsetting her kids. Yeah, she was so delusional that she could not see that she was upsetting everyone, including me. The weeks went by without Karen making good on her threat, or so I thought. One day, while I was out making sure my clients' gardens were properly winterized, I had to come back to get a few bags of topsoil, and as I mentioned before, I would have to move the caddy in order to get into the garage. I fired her up and got a tingle from the bellowing roar of the engine and smiled as I let it coast onto my front lawn. Now, before I go any further, note that just because I'm a landscaper, it does not mean that my garden is the most pristine, picture-perfect example of a garden. If anything, I'm super lazy when it comes to tending my own lawn. With it being winter, it had not been mowed in quite some time, and I usually pay someone to come and do it for me. Well, I like to support others of my trade after all. People like to think that when they get a punctured tire, there is a distinct pop or a bang, followed by a very loud hissing sound. Well, that's not always the case, especially when you slowly roll over a nail, or in this case, a board of nails. What actually alerted me to something being wrong is hearing the sound of nails on a chalkboard. Worried that something was terribly wrong with the car, I got out and saw that a nailboard had scraped along the underside and burst the front tires. At this point, I could hear the hissing. I knew it was Karen. There was literally no one else. I took the nailboard around to her house and confronted her with it. I was furious and immediately started having a go at her, and she just stood there and smiled, feigning ignorance. I realized what she was trying to do, but I couldn't calm myself down. The car was not wrecked, but still, it's the principle of it. I am gonna call the police on you, I said, storming off back to the house. Why, you have no proof it was me, Karen was laughing. I have a video doorbell. I didn't, but it certainly wiped that smile off her face, and when the police came around the next day, she must have been twitching at her curtains or something, because she came right out and started talking to the police before I had the chance. They spoke to each of us, me with one copper, her with the other, and I explained everything that happened pretty much as I'm describing it to you now. I got a little worried that Karen had managed to convince the police that she had done nothing, because the guy I was speaking to gets called over to Karen's house. So I am standing on my porch, heart racing like crazy, instantly thinking that I was gonna get carted away to jail or something, even though I did nothing wrong. About half an hour goes by when the police finally came out of Karen's cave with Karen. She was in handcuffs and got stuffed into the back of the cop car, and they drove away. I later found out through the rumor mill and on the news that the police had found a whole cannabis farm in her basement. It turns out that me and Karen had a lot more in common than I thought, and we both have green thumbs. In addition, I pressed charges against her for the damn nailboard and for damaging my beautiful Cadillac. Let me just tell you, she paid for what she did. The next one is titled, Yes, I Might Have Been the Karen. So I, 17 female, was with my friends 18 male and 19 male at the movie theater to see a movie. We were dressed up, having just come from a dance, and I was wearing heels. I'm a tall girl, about 5'10", and the heels made me even taller. We were getting popcorn at the counter, and the kid behind the counter, who would have been about my height if I wasn't wearing heels, made a snide remark about my height. He said, "Aren't you a little tall to be wearing heels? You would be the same height as me without them, which is already overgrown for a female." I was mad back then and said maybe he should wear padded shoes to be taller, because maybe he is undergrown for a guy. He gave me an evil glare as we were walking away, and my two friends said I embarrassed them by harassing the kid working behind the counter and being a Karen to him. They said I am unhinged and annoying sometimes. Am I the butthole for clapping back against the employee? And a user in the comments said, I don't even think that your friends know who a Karen really is, because you certainly were not one, not the a-hole. The guy behind the counter made a rude comment about your height and your response was entirely appropriate. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, I am 5'10" and I love my heels and my husband loves me wearing my heels, so that is all that matters. When I was younger, I got a lot of snarky male and female comments. The usual one was calling me an Amazon. I would ask them if they really thought calling me a proud woman warrior who fought their own battles was an insult. Then I would thank them and walk my tall ass away wearing shoes that I loved. And yeah guys, let me know in the comments what you think about this story. Do you think that OP was the a-hole or not? In my opinion, OP was definitely not unhinged or anything. And I would say that the employee was certainly unprofessional and should not have made a comment like that. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, and while you're at it, please don't forget to like the video because that would help me tremendously. The next one is titled Toxic Work Environment. One of my first workplaces had an extremely toxic management. It was owned and run by an old couple in their 60s who were co-CEOs. The wife in particular was a bitter racist a-hole who would micromanage everyone, take credit for our work, and also hated my guts more than the rest of the team. By the way, I am minority, female, young, and also opinionated, in other words, all the things she despises. Because she is quite old, she never learned to touch type and instead does the typical hunt and peck style, so once she starts typing, she stares down at her keyboard the entire time. She also tends to write quite long emails. I became so jaded that any form of revenge was screwing with her to brighten my day, so one time I decided to plug a wireless dongle for a mouse into her PC. Once I saw that she was typing, I would wait until she had typed a reasonable amount and then click using the spare mouse somewhere random. She would continue typing, look up and rage at her computer and have to start again. Sometimes I would repeat the process within the same email for extra douchebaggery. My colleagues were in on it, so I would give them a heads up when I clicked so we could all have a laugh. When I was done, I would simply wait until she left and casually unplug the dongle from her PC. Honestly, this is one of the things that kept me sane while I was there until I managed to escape. And the next one is titled Stupid Boss Gets Owned. Okay, so a little bit of a backstory first. I'm a 20-year-old college student full-time and doing 23+ hours a week on top of classes to make ends meet. I live paycheck to paycheck and have a car I am/was paying off. I used to work at a McDonald's in my hometown, but since I moved to live on campus, which was 45 minutes away from my old job, and I was not willing to make the commute. I then decided to apply and got accepted to a small sandwich shop 10 minutes from my college, which was a blessing. It started out great, plenty of hours, easy work and fast days. Until the old manager decided to switch stores. The new manager was one of the biggest Karens you could have ever met. Like bad, and when I say bad, I really mean it. She completely changed the procedures and made things so much worse. And when I would have to stay over sometimes 2 to 3 hours after closing, she would burst in the next day yelling, screaming at the top of her lungs, "Stop staying later, then you have to be out by 8:30. We won't pay you for any time past then." I had no choice because the list she gave me to do to close the store alone every night, may I add, was extremely time consuming, especially with no help. I was expected to stop serving at 8 and do 5 people's worth of work in 30 minutes. So it simply was not doable. Hearing I was not gonna be paid for time I worked, time I spent making sure everything was done on the list before I left, otherwise I would be fired, for not doing all of it would go unpaid, as well as I would be fired if I stayed longer than 8:30. There was no winning. On top of that, the moment management switched, they decided they were giving people too many hours and cut me to only 3 hours a week. That went on for 4 weeks until I decided enough was enough. $45 work weeks was not even worth putting in the time and effort to even show up. So on one of my weekends I was with my parents off campus. I was due to work that day, 3 hours of course, my only day that week. I was shopping near said sandwich shop. It is located inside a Walmart. My mom and I were discussing for the last week how I maybe should just quietly leave, since it seems they are trying to fire me without saying they are firing me, wanting me to leave on my own so they would not need to fill out paperwork. Right then and there, I decided, you know what, screw this job and screw my entitled Karen boss. I sent her a text that I quit on the spot and to not expect me to come in that night for my shift. She texted me back ranting about how since I'm not giving her a 2-week notice, I'll never be able to work at one of those sandwich shops again. At that point though, I did not care. I already had to give up my brand new car of only 4 months because I couldn't pay my loan and insurance. It was a nice car, a white shimmery 2016 Hyundai Sonata. I love that thing. I told her at some point that week I would try to get the brand new uniform that, funnily enough, they had just given to me the week prior, a whole 3.5 months after I started working there. But I warned her my classes run until right before closing. I did not know when I would be able to do so. She texted back in what I could only imagine the snarkiest tone possible. "No, I really need that uniform back tomorrow." I told her I'm sorry, but that may not be possible due to my school schedule, and I'm not willing to ditch a class to drop off a few pieces of clothing. She said, "No, you will bring it back tomorrow, and don't even try to lie to me. You were seen in the store that day. You quit. No excuses." Okay, then she said no excuses. I did not want to go into an argument with her over it. And knowing herself she would be closing that day and my classes ended at 8 exactly, I happily complied. I made sure I would arrive right as she was closing the lock on the gate. I was bringing the clothes in my reusable shopping bag. I had not thrown away bags, and since she cannot take and claim my bag as her own, I was just gonna give her the clothes one piece at a time. Knowing she would have to carry them out of the store, juggling them back home, made me happy. When it came time to deliver my uniform to her, all the stars seemed to align perfectly. I arrived at 8:30, caught her on the way out with the outfit, not even in a reusable bag to begin with. As an extra touch of sweet unplanned irony, it was raining outside, hard rain. The sidewalks I guess were extra slippery and muddy because on my way in, I slipped and landed chest first into the mud. I was mostly spared though because the clothes were there to break my fall and absorb most of the filth. Dropping off the muddy, loose clothes, seeing her reaction, watching her stomp her feet, wrench in disgust, holding the clothes 10 feet away from her body, huff and puff marching out of the store in pure shock and disbelief. She did not even have words for me. It seriously was the sweetest revenge I had ever seen. This did mean that I had to buy a whole new set of clothes and change in the Walmart bathroom, but it was all worth it to see her reaction in the end. After I had returned to my dorm that evening, I sent her a text saying simply, "Enjoy," and I blocked her number, and safe to say, karma really did pay out on my end. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I have to say, that was a beautiful, innocent, petty revenge story, and that's exactly what I like about petty revenge. It is satisfying and yet not too evil or bad. Although then again, sometimes you just need something like pro-revenge or even nuclear revenge to satisfy your needs. The next one is titled, "Too Lazy to Shovel a Space Out for Yourself?" I live on the east coast of the United States where we just had a blizzard dump approximately 2 feet of snow. Since I live in a townhouse, there are public parking spaces across the street from the side that my townhouse is on. My townhouse and the others on the same side as mine have driveways, so during the storm our cars were in the driveway. Our poor neighbors on the other side were forced to dig out their vehicles from over 2 feet of snow. Snowdrifts, man, terrible. And spent hours shoveling so they would have a space to park. Since there wasn't a car in every space, not every space on the other side of the street got shoveled out. And in those empty spaces there was probably over 4 feet of snow from the plows. The neighbor directly across the street from me left before the storm to go to work, where she got stuck for the duration of the storm plus a few days. When she got home, there was not an open space for her to park. I'm assuming she thought that her neighbors would have dug her out a space from the 4 feet of snow piled outside of her house, but alas, she has a long history of being one of the worst people I have encountered, and no one did her any favors. Because of this, she decides to just park in the street up against already parked cars and in front of our driveway. Long story short, we asked her to move. She said she would if someone shoveled her a spot. We called the police. The officer said that the cars she blocked in were okay with it and that she would be gone before we had to pull out of the driveway. Of course, this officer didn't think that maybe everyone else having to get past her car on my street would have a problem, but whatever. He was busy, he didn't have time to deal with a silly neighbor dispute. Cut to yesterday, there are plenty of spaces now that the Homeowners Association arranged for a private company to come out with a bobcat. The spot in front of her house is open, she has parked her van there. I look around, I take my water bottle out of my car, I walk across the street, I pour it all around her van. Today there is a nice ice patch for her to walk on while she gets in her vehicle. The next one is titled, "My neighbor keeps throwing his cigarette butts at my door." At first I was finding cigarette butts strewn around the front of our 12-unit apartment building, but only from one person. He is a heavy smoker, and the family that lived above me when I first moved in warned me that he was bad about this. Nobody else in our unit smokes, and I've never seen anyone from the adjacent unit smoking outside either. It is not allowed inside the apartments. I started picking up his cigarette butts and placing them near his door as a nice way of reminding him to throw out his own trash rather than littering up the building I also pay exorbitant rent to live within. One day I found the smoking gun as I was taking my dog out for a morning walk, a still burning cigarette next to his car. I flicked it at his door as I was on a time crunch before work, and he just so happened to open the door seconds later. I was the only one in proximity, so one could put two and two together. He was giving me a dirty look as I pulled out of my parking spot. Cut to yesterday, I find all the cigarette butts I had tossed from the night before strewn around my door. Ah, okay, so it is other people's responsibility to clean up your crap. Well, I was not about to play that game, so I contacted the apartment office to let them know what was going on. And they informed me that they would post a note to his door warning him to either buy an ashtray for outside or to throw them away lest he be hit with a lease violation. I think those are around $75. I get home from my fourth consecutive 12-hour workday in a rolling metal box in direct Texas sunlight to find the butts once again littering my doorway, as well as a freshly smoked one with the ash still on it. I shrugged, went inside, sprayed all the butts down with aerosol cooking oil and put them back outside in an old pile of bird poo from a nest that was knocked down over his door. When he picks them up, he's going to wonder what vile substance just coated his hand. I went ahead and sent a follow-up message to the office to let them know this was escalating and that I would rather they confront him than myself. So now that fool is going to get a greasy hand and a rent hike. Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, my entitled neighbor was jealous of my classic car and demanded that I let her drive it around with her kids. When I refused, she raged and ended up trying to destroy my vehicle with a board of nails. Here is what happened to this awful neighbor. Let's dive right into the story.